And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Gary Mary, who's the Chief Executive Officer for Risk Profiling. Gary, thanks very much for joining me. How are you?
Thanks, David. Great. How are you doing this morning?
Good. I'm so excited to have you, specifically because you are a practitioner in the cybersecurity space, but you're also an entrepreneur, and you managed to combine the two worlds into creating something you love. And so, but before we jump into that, why don't we get started and just to let the audience kind of know about you, what you've done, your career path, and so on, and what propelled you to be a chief executive officer for a company that's up and coming.
Yeah, tracing my origin back to a farm boy in Missouri, read a lot of books about adventures and all of that, and joined the Marine Corps. Decided that I wanted to see the world. Spend some energy and then go to college after that. So went to college. First job was a coder, doing Cray Fortran/C for Phillips Petroleum, Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Great little place. And sort of, worked my way up from there into a CIO position for a struggling retailer. And, it was one of those retailers that, we really had no budget, really not a lot of reason for us to be on the market. In fact, I remember one time we needed a new server, but we couldn't afford one. Memory was super expensive back then. So every month we would buy one piece. We would buy memory one month, hard drive the next month, the casing the next month, and then we had a server. And we went from there. I went from being the CIO up through the ranks, and suddenly found myself as an EVP in a COO role where I had my own CIO. And we took that little retailer and we sold it in 2014, Joseph A. Bank. We sold it for $1.8 billion. We went from $2 stocks to an accretion of over $1,200 when we sold it for $64 a share in 2014 to Men's Warehouse. So that's where I think that's where I really cut my teeth in technology, believe it or not. I was never a better technologist, I think, until I actually had a CIO reporting to me, and things changed for me, especially at the board level. You hear about we need CISOs in the board and we need CIOs in the board and all of that. And I actually lived through that. I lived through the experience of being appointed to the board, being on the board, and kind of that deep understanding of what I was doing wrong. So at first, my first few meetings, I had like the last slide of the deck. Everyone was ready to go home. They were all tired. Everyone had they said what they wanted to say, and I got the last slide. And when I knew I was in trouble, my CEO would call me Spock. And so to this day, I got this cringe reaction when I hear the word Spock, because the moment he called me Spock, I knew my one little slide had done nothing. And so going from that to
hold on, is Spock as this, is he kind of the not the Star Wars, but the
Star Trek,
Star Trek, because why? Because of the Brainiac thing going on, or what?
Yeah, just sort of this purist. He was, yeah, it was exactly that. He wasn't a Star Wars fan, Star Trek fan. What he was a guy who understood what a board needed in what I wasn't doing correctly. And so I was sort of this purist. And I thought, well, since I'm so smart and I know technology so well, these guys are going to listen to me. And come to find out I was wrong. In fact, if you go into any kind of a board thinking that you can just, because you know something or because you're a subject matter expert or because you understand the business, you're not going to be successful. And boards are about being successful. You're not, the interview for the board before I was ever appointed started years before that. It's a vetting process that you have to go through. And that is, what kind of a job you do, what kind of a person you are, and can you coexist with other people who don't necessarily have the same agenda with you as you. So, yeah, I went from having a name of you're just being Spock, you're not paying attention, to being an active member and actually participating. So that was quite a transition for a guy who started off as a code slinger to suddenly deciding the fate of a multi-billion-dollar company.
And it's an amazing story, specifically because you were growing with the business. As you mentioned, it was a struggling retailer, and then you grew the business. And with the growth of the business comes all kinds of different challenges in terms of IT, in terms of cybersecurity specifically. Yeah. And retailers as well have a bunch of cybersecurity issues related to them, whether it's protecting their presence online, protecting their consumer data. There's all slew of things you had to deal with. So you kind of glance over the entire period, but you spent some time there. What was it like? And I'm assuming a lot of it was, OJT, on the job training, right? Because you were climbing through the ranks, and at a time, there wasn't as much information available, like, for example, on YouTube. Today, there's this explosion of that. You want to know about any topic, you just Google it and YouTube it or whatever. But back then, how did you become proficient in all of the different areas? And I'm assuming some of them, if not all of them, were pretty new.
Yeah, this is back in 2000. We took over, we as a team were put together by a gentleman by the name of Bob Wildrick. And Bob was sort of the last of the great retailers, big retailers, brick and mortar, old school. And, again, with the lack of a budget, basically I made every mistake you could possibly make. And I actually got lucky throughout and managed to stay one step ahead of the badness. But, in 2000, like you said, we didn't have a lot of references. And, retail's extremely hostile when it comes to technology itself, to practices, to adherence. So we went from having 100 stores, and I was given the store organization. So I went from being the CIO to actually growing the stores to 640 stores. So you imagine you have 640 vectors, entry points that you've got to worry about. And one of the things I did, first and foremost, was learn the business, and Bob made sure of that. Bob Wildrick. One of the things he made us do is work in the stores. One of my first memories as a technologist was trying to figure out how to sell suits and thinking to myself, what am I doing here? I mean, what do I have to learn how to sell a suit? Why do I have to worry about this? And come to find out that all played a role later when I really understood the business and was able to figure out how to do things, such as one of the first things I did with my CISO group was made them go out to the stores. And if you were part of the CISO group, the security group, you had to work in the stores, not work in the stores, but you had to visit at least 4 stores a year. Didn't care who they were. You had a couple of goals. One is to take a POS and leave with it, take a card reader and leave with it, or insert something onto a POS. Those were your goals. And I didn't care where you went. I didn't care when you went. And the guys, I think they loved it. I can't tell you how many, one of the things they would do is they take a picture of the server or take a picture of the POS they managed to get out to their rental car and show it to me to show that they had, kind of counted coup. But it was good for the stores. Nobody ever got, punished for that. It was all about learning. The store managers themselves, the employees themselves, and, it made me look like I cared about more than just this little bubble of technology. And this was real early on.
Yeah, it's almost like physical security.
What's that?
It's almost like physical security. You were conducting your own kind of pen testing, quote unquote, physical security exercise.
Yeah.
And and it's super interesting because what made you do that? Was it something like that you were taught, or is part of the kind of almost like its own hands-on awareness training where you force the the store managers to be aware of what could happen potentially. And walking out with a POS, that's a big deal. I mean, that's not a joke. Like coming in and walking, like grab, it's a big item. It's not like somebody can just ignore that.
Yeah, it wasn't really a snatch and grab. They would go in and say, hey, I'm with POS support, ball cap on or something. And the manager would be busy. He or she would be like, okay, just let me know when you're done or whatever. And they would walk over, take the POS or take the card reader. Or like I said, insert something into the POS, which caused us later to figure out how to neuter the pen drives. And this was back, and we were building our own POSs. So we had a lot of hands-on knowledge of those boxes. So what made me do it? I think I have to tell you, it's a little bit of a story, but one of the first things that happened to me was I was at an event in New York, and I learned a lot along that line where I was talking and someone walked up to me, and he was the head of our POS company. And he said, oh, so you guys lost your keys. And I don't know, wasn't paying attention. I had a glass of wine in my hand. It wasn't in that right gear. I was in a different gear. And I was like, yeah, sure. And kind of laughed it off. And I went over a little while later and I was like, that doesn't sound right. So I called my CISO and I said, listen, this guy just told me we lost our keys. And he was like, no, you don't lose your keys. It's not like you leave them on the desk. There's no way we lost our keys. So went back over, engaged him and said, listen, what are you talking about? We lost our keys. He goes, yeah, you lost your encryption keys. And so we started an investigation. Short story long, we had a summer intern. This is real early on. And we had a summer intern, and our interns would come in our catalog group, and they would make calls, or they would take calls, depending on how long they'd been there. But we gave them access to our phone system, and we gave them access to the other members of the team. So what this one person did was he, during smoke breaks, set out with the POS support team, got to know them a little bit, and then decided he was in school for early on cyber degree in Maryland. And he started calling our POS providers, not just POS, all of our technology providers. And again, short story long, he was able to get from our vendors, just because of his caller ID, he would call and say, hey, this is Gary.
No way.
POS support.
That is amazing.
Dude, they sent him documentation. He called our POS team and said, hey, this is, whatever, Gary or POS support. We've had a problem. We've lost our keys. Can you send me the encryption keys? They sent them to him.
Yeah, just because that was before people knew, caller ID spoofing. I guess it wasn't a thing back.
And these were, again, this is 2001, 2002-ish, before things really, really became urgent in the cybersecurity world. And so, we called the FBI. We honestly didn't know what to do. We got him in and he admitted to everything. He said, well, I'm just writing a paper. It's not a big deal, right? And we're like, yeah, it's a very big deal. And he had taken home hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation that had been sent to him, not just by our POS provider, but really every single provider we had gave him that information. So that was kind of the impetus. We put in a 2-factor callback thing with all of our vendors, had a long, deep talk with our POS provider about what that meant, suddenly became much more aware of the handling of our encryption keys. We had our own head-end processor, so we brought the cards into our own shop, which we changed later. But so from there, it made me start thinking, physical security is a pretty big deal. And so that's when I came up with the
retailers,
idea.
Right? Especially retailers, because of the huge attack surface. As you mentioned, you had 600 plus stores. How is it possible for you to manage all of them and be physically there, or even have the people that are aware? Unless you, as you mentioned, is a store manager or everybody who works at the store is completely aware. Yeah. And that person was a poster child for insider threat.
I mean, nobody even used that word back then. The insider threat, we were like, I was completely stunned by the whole thing. But the insider threat became a big deal. We had some hot stove rules we put in place. no technology in the stores. You can't bring laptops into the stores. You can't do anything like that. And I can tell you more than one occasion, especially, different groups, the store manager specifically, whereas we used to have, there's a lot of turnover in retail, of course, not of course, but there is a lot of retailer. And then you have summer interns, the same idea. They're doing some summer courses. During their break, they bring their laptops, they sit down and they do some coursework and things like that. Well, we hard outlawed that. It's called the hot stove rule. No matter who you were investigated and dismissed. So we had a lot of growing up to do, but the industry was growing up back then too. I mean, we were doing a lot of that. And the one thing I think we did, David, is force multiply. And all of those things came together and still comes together for me in the what made me a good board member and what made me a good corporate citizen and what made me effective as a CIO and as a COO. All of those things, it made me understand that, I have a bigger role to play here than just simply talking to technologists. And even today, it's pretty rare when I go to an event where I'm just talking to technologists. I want to talk to the guys who control the budget. And I want to talk to the folks who are in charge of compliance and things such as that, and create an environment that isn't adversarial, but is, as I said, a force multiplier. Because again, you don't always have the budget you need. In fact, you almost never have the budget you need.
And there's no substitute for a real hands-on experience like you had. Yeah. Where you experienced on your own, persona is how things can go wrong. And, as a person in charge, what it means, because I'm sure being, having that eye opener, and I'm sure there were a lot of other incidents through the years. And also what's interesting is you mentioned specifically how, and it's known that retailers are kind of lean and mean in terms of the IT, in terms of the spending. It's always I've heard that salespeople, for example, in the sales organization were, if they were not liked by their sales manager, they were assigned the retail sector. Yeah. Because that's what they say. The retail sectors have, deep pockets and, short arms. They just can't get to their money to spend. And so, so talk to me about that. And how do you, and why is that? Why are retailers notorious for not spending, as much? And then on top of that, it seems like there's, for the longest time, there were so many retailers that were in the news for being breached, for various reasons, whether through a third party or through, like Wi-Fi technologies. Like Target is just a big one that comes to mind, but there's just so many of them. TJ Maxx was on the news. Why specifically retailers?
As I said, it's retail and hospitality are both fairly hostile environments. You've got employees who, for instance, we had employees who had never been in one of our stores before they started working with us. We had employees that were, transient in that they didn't really, that wasn't their career. They were just doing it because that's where they wanted to be. But the other side of that is we did have some really good professionals who worked for us at the same time, who did a fantastic job, who paid attention and all of that. But there's this sort of wave motion in retail where you've got, even in IT, folks who come in and know they're going to spend a year or two there, or maybe not even that, while they're looking for something else. And I have to tell you, there's a guy I used to follow on LinkedIn. He's a famous guy, and he talks a lot. He's in a lot of events, and he was just raving about how much he hated salespeople. And he works for Walmart, of all things. I was like, dude, you work for Walmart. Your job isn't to rave against your machine. Your job, or rage against your machine. Your job is to find a way to make that machine come together. And it's hard. It is hard because, again, turnover is a thing. You're an easy target. You've got a lot of moving parts that need to be managed. You have teams, for instance, I had folks who was on my CISO staff who were like, look, I'm I'm a technologist. I'm not going to go visit a store or play any of these silly games. And they just didn't make it. They needed to go somewhere where they were surrounded by technologists. But, David, when I kind of looping back to this idea that, for me to be effective, I had to be more than just a technologist. And that's true really in any industry. And to be honest, all business is retail, really. I mean,
yes,
some people are retailers, but you're all retail. You're all selling something. You've all got gross margins. It's all retail.
That's what I'm saying. People don't realize, like, and I don't understand why there's this, dichotomy between, we don't like salespeople, but everything is sales. Maybe you're not directly connected to, but someone in your organization is selling something in order for the organization to exist and for you to get a paycheck.
And they paid your salary.
So where is this disconnect? Like, the sales is not bad. It's, we live in a capitalist society. The whole economic engine is based on manufacturing, selling, and then the money trickles through the society to somebody. There's nothing bad about it. And you saying, and we're talking a bit about that, like, how the vendors have a bad rep as well. When they go out and ask for money. Yeah, salespeople are essential, and maybe not, not all salespeople are equal. But there's nothing bad about selling. Nor it's the whole economy has to be driven by something and by making revenue. Right?
Yeah, if you're getting a paycheck this week, there's a salesman that was responsible for that,
right?
And you should embrace that. And you should. So the point being, not so much segregating and bifurcating roles and responsibilities. It's about going from being Spock, which you're just spouting doctrine, to actually becoming an effective leader. And to become that effective leader, you've got to understand what your industry is doing in the challenges and how do you become part of that. The way I became a good board member was that I had to make sure that I wasn't making my own points. I had to make sure that my CFO, my CRO, Chief Risk Officer, that my CEO, everyone else was part of that decision, not just me with trying to make a magic slide, which I did. I mean, like I said, I made every mistake you could possibly make. I had this small little window, and I would try to put anything I could in there to make them understand how right I was. And the only time I got them to understand how right I was when it became our initiatives, and it became our company. It became and I did that by really spending time.
And Gary, were you a good, suit seller, or did you manage to get your quota when you were selling the suit at the store? And then the other question was, were you well dressed? Since you were, working I
still own like 30 suits. It's crazy. I don't know what I'm going to do with those. Maybe they'll be in a museum someday.
Hey, as an executive at one of the biggest, fastest growing, clothing men's store, I mean, it's given. I'd be surprised if you said otherwise.
Oh yeah, shoot. We had this, our number one seller, this guy named Syed Sharifi down in Atlanta, and he had Jimmy Carter, and he had all these people as his customers, and he is amazing. And what he is he's he not only knows his product, but he understands the psychology and the man. That guy would go in there, and I'd go in to visit the stores, which I did a lot. And he would sell me something every time. And I'd tell myself, listen, Syed's not going to sell me something today. It's just not going to happen. And I'd walk out and I'd spend like $200 or $300. And I was like, what just happened? So point being is that ability in interfacing with people like that, I think all of that, learning how Syed sold his suits, how we made our living. One of the things the board used to say to me was, how many stores is that? And you ask, why is it there's so many opposing forces in retail. And, my board used to say, listen, how many stores is that? I wanted to put in tripwire. I needed something at rest. I needed to look at my data at rest. And I needed to kind of canonize or get these hard drives where you couldn't put stuff on them. And because my CISO group was killing us. They were going out and putting stuff on POSs. We didn't know where they were. And so it was always a struggle, and it was a lot at the time. I didn't follow tripwire beyond that, but how many stores is that? And that question, the first time I heard it, I was thinking, that's ridiculous. What do you mean, how many stores is that? And our stores generated X amount of revenue, and if I spent, and it cost us Y amount to build a store, So I was spending about 3 stores worth of, money. And those stores generated, let's say they generated this much, and they wanted to know, will your tripwire make us this much? And the answer is this age-old challenge that we all have as technologists, which is, no, but they could cost you this much. But people are numb to that. This whole sky is falling, if you don't, the bad guy's going to come here, Russia's going to get you, somebody's going to get you. Your CFOs are numb to that. You've got to put it into the context of how many stores is that? And you're like, well, this is how many stores, and this is why. And I again, at that time, when I was getting asked those questions, I also was responsible for the stores. So I had to make that. I couldn't make that point. I couldn't, because I was the technology. I was Spock, but my CFO could, and my CRO could. CRO not so much, but the CFO could. Our CRO is mainly about standards and things such as that, which I'm a huge fan of. But when my CFO stepped in and was shaking his head and was making the point for me, my budget was approved and I was able to kind of move forward. But me as a CTO or CIO, I could never have made that point. So yeah, I think
that's amazing. And so I wanted to maybe distill that message as, because this is something that a lot of people can apply to today, right? So people with cybersecurity, practitioners or not, or depending on what level you get to and you're responsible for technology, you have to work with your CFO and make them understand where the technology. So talk to me about that. What is kind of the best way to present your requirements, and maybe in the general terms, not so much in retailer, but in your opinion, how can we make that relationship better, and how can technologies and cybersecurity professionals can translate their requirements? Because we see this all the time, right? We see, and especially now, budgets are getting cuts. You have to do more with less. We were thinking automation is going to solve a lot of it, which is not necessarily true. Yeah. And then we're dealing with the ever lasting lack of human talent out there to fill those jobs. So we have a lot of moving parts for us to be able to protect the organization.
Yeah. So, one of the things I've always thought is that, we should have, instead of bring your pet to work day, you bring your CFO to work day. And I used to almost think that when I was, again, had a CFO that was a very big part of our growth. Anytime you're growing, your CFO is playing a pretty big role. But, I think if you look at what you're doing, like, for instance, I love standing in front of a group of technologists and having them look at me and me say something and feel that, like, I just said something that they liked. That is such a high. When you're talking to technologists and you feel like I finally made it, these guys love me. They know I'm Spock, but they love me anyhow. It's such a cool feeling. But the fact is that if you're a technologist talking to a technologist, you're not really fulfilling what you need to fulfill to protect whoever your employer is. I love it. RSA is coming up. You go there and you're surrounded in a swarm of technologists who get it, and they're all preaching the same choir. They're all preaching. But the problem is the people that you need to preach to aren't in your pews. they're at work and they're balancing the budget, or they're doing an initiative for Sarbanes or anything like that. So, point being is that if you're just talking to technologists, it does feel good, and it does sort of kind of reaffirm all the efforts you've put into becoming who you are. But if you want to be effective, you need to talk to people who aren't in technology. If you've done more presentations to technologists than your own organization, your CFO, your chief revenue officer, your whomever inside of your company, you're not on the right track. You're always going to be frustrated. You want to feel power. You want to feel good. You sit in a board meeting, accepted, and somebody else is making your point for you. To me, that's success. Mm-hmm. And it's not to downgrade all the effort that we put into becoming who we are as technologists, but to really take on the problem, you got to grow. And that growth isn't always behind understanding, a new language or a new platform, or how to deploy into the cloud, strategically, that's good. But if you want to really protect a company and you really want to be effective as a technologist, you got to get out of that comfort zone, and you got to go start talking to that CFO. You got to have brown bags. You got to seek that audience, and you can't stand up on your soapbox in a board meeting, but you can before the board meeting. You can separate and you can talk to every one of those people. And suddenly when you're there and you're finally invited into the board, you're accepted and not made fun of with a pet name like Spock.
and things have really progressed. It seems like there was a certain turning point, like I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where all of a sudden cybersecurity became a kind of a board discussion, and it wasn't before, right? So you remember what was a turning point? And it seems like that board members are now more aware than ever, and it seems also like from a CISO perspective, CISOs now are kind of reporting more to the CEO as opposed to the CIO. And then potentially we may see, CEOs who used to be a CISO, right? I mean, there's no, not just a CRO or a CMO or whatever the case may be. It seems like there's quite a transition to that. What's your take on that? Why did the transition happen? And are we, did it help from an organizational standpoint to bring all those companies to a more sustainable cybersecurity level, or things have not changed? Yeah.
So one of the things that used to happen to me, David, and it was my board of directors were former military, as I said, MI, but our chairman of the board was a full admiral, and we had a couple other admirals and Navy, Marine Corps folks. And one of the things when I would walk into the board, the chairman would be there shaking everybody's hands as they came in, and he would look at me and he'd get close and he'd say, "Are we secure?" And I remember thinking, "Oh my God, do I tell this guy? Do I tell him how I just worked all night long? I didn't sleep last night because we thought we had an incident. Do I tell him all of this?" And of course you got to find a way to answer that question. Are we secure? In the boardroom is a horrible question. And it's such a tough question to come to grips with. And it's such a simple question. He wanted to know, are we secure? He didn't want
to. I would have asked him back. I would say, hey, define secure.
Well, it was, we weren't really on the debate. He was a full admiral and a chairman of a board. And I was trying to figure out how to kind of get my footing. But, so I think what's changed is I think I'm not the only one to have this epiphany. And I think just as normal humans, we find the right path eventually. Maybe not everyone does, but somebody does. And I think certainly in my case, I had a very obvious path to ignore all of that, stay heads down, be a technologist, go to RSA, stand in front of everyone and take those adulations, or I could go over and try to make my company secure and get my butt kicked over and over and over and over until I figured out what I was doing wrong and how to be effective. So I think today, the technology is amazing. I mean, we have got some amazing technology. I think the deployment of it is solid. We're still not winning. And if we ask ourselves, why aren't we winning? Just putting someone in the board isn't enough. If it was, we wouldn't still be where we're at today. I mean, those numbers can't be ignored. As you said, certain sectors of business have gone round and around and around, and you just know every morning you're going to read somebody else, lost everyone's information in one way or another. So I think we're on the right track. I think, as you said, the CEOs of tomorrow are much more cognizant. It's still, as a CEO, you've got a business to run. You need those stores. And how many stores does that cost? Can I afford to pay that instead of opening a store or a website or, something else? So I think we're moving in the right direction. I certainly think how inclusive we've become, or we're becoming, is very important. I think diversity is paramount. And I think you're seeing more in more of that. I don't, again, we're humans. We're always a work in progress. But I think, as I see companies and see some of these folks that are becoming the CEOs, as well as some of the folks that I know, the peers that I know, the only challenge to that, David, is that, if at the same time we have a tendency to still idolize these guys these folks who speak well, and they talk about, this is the problem, we must do this, we must do that. And they're just hollow words. If you're only talking to technologists and you're a technologist, your words aren't wrong, but they're hollow in their effectiveness. You've got to talk to your business or the business, or go talk to a CFO group, go talk to an accounting group, or I had to take a whole course on accounting. I can tell you, my CFO was, of course, an accountant, and I literally couldn't find myself on the same. I couldn't get him to understand what I was trying to do, and I had to learn accounting. And it sounds silly, but it helped me. And once you figured out that I did that, it wasn't that I didn't understand. I didn't have a basic course in college, but I needed to understand what he was doing in retail accounting and things such as that. So I became a better technologist by taking it.
And it's a language. Accounting is a language. It's
got its own grammar. It's got its own everything. And when you talk to somebody like that, you don't sound right unless you. And I think he appreciated it. Didn't certainly stop us from necessarily having separate opinions, but it was more effective for me. And so, anyhow, your question was, what was the inflection point, or are things going in the right direction? I didn't say that, but I think we are. I do think that when I see a prominent technologist on a platform talking about how much they hate salespeople, I think we're not going in the right direction sometimes in that regard. But, that's easy enough to correct. And if he worked for me, I promise you he would have corrected it. and gone somewhere else.
And it seems like, some, companies are consumers and customers are becoming smarter as well. Like I've came across it's just some forum where somebody says, hey, don't buy from this online retailer because they're notoriously known for losing your data, which I thought was like amazing. Just coming out from, I don't know who that person was, but some, customer, potential client. And he said, don't buy from them because of that. And it seems like some retailers and just companies in general are embracing, cybersecurity as almost as a competitive advantage in the sense that they're like, saying, hey, we don't sell your data. This is how we protect it. You see some disclaimers on the website. And even though there's a lot of automation and it seems like a lot of stuff becoming, self-service. So maybe kind of salespeople are, I wouldn't say diminishing, but have different roles, maybe becoming more of a consultative type of sales. But they're still applying cybersecurity as a, not just as a cost center, but potentially as a kind of a competitive advantage.
Yeah, as well. I think it's true. Even like I'm in the SaaS business, and we're an EASM company. When you look at our product or any product, if you're a SaaS or if you're a technology company providing cybersecurity technology or services, you've got to get out there and understand the businesses that you're servicing. And I think the technology is becoming better. I think sort of the opposite side of that, David, is that the technology is becoming real dense and real complicated, and it's crazy. It's the complications we have today. I would never have imagined back even 10 years ago. And the technology, I think, the modern technology is real good. I think that there's some danger in having legacy applications. I know a lot of people won't like that statement because there are some very effective legacy applications, but the problem set has changed to such a degree and is continuing to change. And as I said, the people who are creating this technology are answering to the business needs. And so, a lot of the changes are not waiting for the technology to catch up. It's constantly evolving, and it's, these got these crazy networks that are out there today that are.
Yeah, people are not building their own servers, I don't think. Imagine building a clouds, like your own server and hosting it somewhere. It's just the complexity. So so much that people just but then people spin off services, and this whole cloud and application sprawl. People don't even know what they have.
Oh yeah,
it's so easy to spin off.
I probably spend in a given week a quarter of my week exploring new things that I've never even. I'm like, wow. I wish I didn't know that this was happening. We do a lot of AI, machine learning, and some natural language work. And that in itself.
Hey, Gary, talk to me about risk profiling. I think that's a good segue to what you do today. So, first of all, what made you jump into kind of deep end, the dark side, if you wish, of becoming an entrepreneur? Because you were on the buyer side of technology, but now you're on kind of the selling side of creation, which is not easy. I mean, it's not easy to be a CIO, but it's definitely not easy to become an entrepreneur, especially in this technology space. What made you do it? And then talk to me about risk profiler.
Yep. So listen, I was a guy who was an executive. I had 5,000 people in my organization. We had $100 million of payroll I had to manage. Not me, but my team did. To suddenly finding myself deciding what I wanted to do next. And I know having the big job was similar to standing in front of a room full of technologists. It had its own gratifications and all of that. But I've always loved technology, and I've always loved sort of the tactile feel of creation. If I'm anything, I'm a builder. I build things in my personal life and in my professional life. And so the only place I could really do that and really kind of get a feel for that was in the startup. And I can't tell you how many people have asked me, you went from, being an executive to going to a startup and creating it from scratch, which is Herculean, to suddenly that's kind of my space now. I love being in this because this is where the real ideas are emanating from, and the usage, like the way you can take a technology and use it in so many different ways. And the people who, this new generation of, that grew up on this distributed cloud web-based world.
And Gary, you moved from Spock to Captain Kirk, basically, because you're like the captain of your own ship right now.
Let me tell you, that was tough. It wasn't tough, other than I realized that I needed to catch up, and I still need to catch up every day. I'm finding something, and I use these different communities that I'm kind of on the periphery of, be it the hacker community. If you're in technology today and you're not listening to what the hacker community is saying, not the sermon about, it's about what the way they see the world, you're missing out. You're not really missing out, but you're not building the toolbox that you need. Their opinions, their ideas are not necessarily effective, but they should be something that you listen to. You may not necessarily.
Yeah, it changes so much, right? Like if you stop doing that and you come back within a month, it is amazing how people don't realize how quickly the environment changes. I mean, it's really, all you have to do is, like, even a geopolitical things that happens now makes a huge impact on our kind of cybersecurity. I mean, there's so much happening on any given moment, which is almost tough to distill. Like, and you mentioned you're in some of these forums, but imagine you quit and come back after several weeks. It's like a whole different.
I have a Discord account. There's different things that I do, different vectors that I use to try to kind of keep up with things. And on the Discord side, you spend a couple of days, you go back in, you're like, what is this? And you find yourself scrambling. So anyhow, I think that you've got to be self-aware of what's going on. It's going on incredibly fast. You may find, and we do at Risk Profiler, I can't tell you how many times we've pivoted because we've discovered something that's super effective that somebody put out on Reddit, or they put it out on GitHub, and we're like, oh gosh, brilliant. That's awesome. So you're aggregating, but you can't aggregate without knowledge. And so, listen, that's the beauty of being in the startup world. If you're the kind of person who loves to grow and build, and find yourself flat-footed, trying to even understand the vernacular, and then suddenly you feel like you're part of it, and even though you're really not. I mean, the guys at Discord have got me figured out, but I still listen to what they're saying and what's going on. Maybe I'm a little bit of a lurker. I don't know, but I learn, and I may not know it there. I go out and do some, either ask my guys or do some research myself. So one of the things that I've always been interested in is how do we, as we said, all business is retail, but guess what? All crime is commerce. If it's not commerce, you're not a very good criminal. If you're not doing a transaction and you're not taking something and selling it, you're not a good criminal. And so one of the challenges that I've always had, David.
And by the way, Gary, it's so interesting you mentioned that. Even ransomware is a transaction. So basically they're taking hold of the data. Yeah, it's getting hold of the data and then selling it to you, to the data owner. Basically, reselling it to the data owner. Yeah. That's what ransomware is. If you think about it, it's a retail transaction.
It is. Or they send it to some big data place that aggregates it and turns it around. But
they figure out you are it's more lucrative to sell the data back to you because you're the, primary, the one who cares about your data.
Absolutely.
They get less money if they put it out there somewhere. Yeah. They get more money by selling it back to you.
Yeah.
Which is a retail transaction. It's brilliant, if you think about it.
Yeah. So, unless you understand that, it's pretty hard to prevent or to build a piece of technology that to counteract it or to defend against it. And so if you don't understand the business, you're not going to create an effective security product. You just won't. It may be great and you may get in front of the RSA crowd and they may carry you around on their shoulders, but you really haven't moved the ball forward or down the field until it actually is effective inside of the business. So, one of the challenges that I was in the vulnerability management business for a while and helping a friend turn a company around. And, the VMs that we have today, Tenable, Rapid7, and Qualys are the real big players. They're awesome, man. What they do is amazing, and their technology is amazing. The challenge there is that they're kind of like looking for the bank robber inside of the bank. But if you're a good bank robber, you're gone, man. You took the money, you ran. And so you do get a lot of forensics and you get a lot of information. You can keep the robber from getting in there, keep them from getting into the cash drawer. Somehow or another, they keep doing it. So something's not working. They are very good at what they do. They're very effective at what they do. But the crime rate, as it were, has not really gone down.
Yeah, I think just to add to that is, for example, why companies are starting to, I think, move away from SIMs, because SIM captures what happened. So by the time you get around to, by the time you capture all of that and doing the forensics, as you mentioned, the bank robber is already gone. You're doing the past tense. Everything's already gone. You capture something that's already irrelevant.
Yeah, it's like looking for something under a light in the dark because it's light, but you lost it in the dark. It's kind of one of those things. And I get it, man. I get it. They've got a great history, all three of those companies. But what we wanted to do with risk profilers, we wanted to go outside of that light cone and get outside of the bank and really go out and kind of figure out what the bad guys are doing to get in the first place. So there's this technology today that's called EASM, External Attack Surface Monitoring or Management. And that's our space, which is, what are we going to find about your company out in the OSINT world, the, open source information world? And what's out there. I mean, you think about doing phishing attacks, right? What most companies do is they have this program where they do phishing against their own employees. They grade them, and you get in trouble if you fall for it too many times and things like that. Again, you're inside the bank. And the question is in order for that phish to work, they have to take that information and it needs to go somewhere, and they have to pretend to be you in order for you to do that, or pretend to be Microsoft or Google or whomever. So with EASM, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, well, let's go find those landing pages. Let's go find those typo squattings. Let's go find where these bad guys either came from or went to. And so you're starting to see a lot of action around this. Tenable just bought a company that was in the ESM space. A lot of what's a very modern approach. A lot of the things, for instance, Risk Profiler couldn't even have existed, 5 years ago. The technology wasn't there. The AI wasn't there. The machine learning wasn't there. We convert we have these swarms that we send out, but we go out and we look in 40 different languages, because odds are wherever your information is, it's not going to be in a nice, tidy little server with English phrasing or English file names.
People forget. People are so, all of us, we're very, you mentioned English and geolocation centric, but the World Wide Web is not just there, right? There's so much out there.
Your data is not going to be sitting on a server where you can read the words, the file structure. That's why the Chinese are so good at hacking. Understanding, how to go out and look at what's going on a server somewhere in China is hard. So we have some natural language machine learning that we do, where we're out converting into different languages, looking for hints, whispers, shadow, risk for different surfaces. It used to be we just talk assets, but now you talk surfaces, and surfaces are kind of an abstraction, almost a meta of that. And what are your different surfaces that can be vectored into to take your product? So EASM is an amazing extension of the legacy VM world, and I think it's relevant. I think that unless again you understand how businesses work, it's hard, because you think you're just looking for direct correlation, but this stuff is tangential, it's fuzzy, it's in a different language, it's somewhere you never expected. It may look real. So that's what we do with Risk Profiler. And listen, when we started Risk Profiler, I had a background in VM, and suddenly we're trying to figure out how to use AI to create models. I'm a math guy. So the models came naturally, but adopting it into an effective tool was a really cool process. So I think that the whole technology space, that EASM space, is something that's been missing. And I think that a lot of the standards today are forcing more of a maturity. CMMC, if it ever really becomes the law of the land, it was brilliant. Maturity has always been a problem for us. And for me too. I can tell you, you're talking about SIM. I've had a love-hate relationship with logs from the very beginning of syslog servers and things like that, because you look into those things and you're trying to figure out because it's all like Klingon. It's like gobbledygook. You're like, what is this? And it changes personalities and all of that. And SIM's a great idea. It just hasn't found its footing yet. One of the things I used to do, looping this back to CMMC, the maturity, is that we were a development shop. At one point, everyone was a development shop back in retail. And if you broke a build, you had to watch the log, because every day per early Sarbanes, someone had to look at those logs. So if you broke a build as punishment, I made you watch the logs every day. So when you looked at the logs, the auditors would be, they look at the logs every day. But meanwhile, the people who were doing it were doing a crappy job. And they'd never been trained on it. They didn't know what they were looking at. And so standards are starting to make more sense. CMMC is starting to make more sense. NIST is getting the footing it deserves and needs, where we can either augment or replace these industrial standards like PCI, HIPAA, not so much HIPAA, but PCI, and, some of the ISOs and different things such as that. So I think, bringing the standards maturity to the table, creating these tools using modern platforms, the future looks bright, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
And today, if somebody wanted to deploy Risk Profiler and look at kind of the external attack surface to see what's out there and to see if there's, so first of all, like, what's that process look like if somebody wanted to give it a try? And then what the expectations are? I mean, you notify them of potential risks, and then they have to go and fix it, or do you help them with that process as well?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do differently than the VM side, because when you spin up Qualys or Rapid7, you give them a range of IP addresses. It's a credentialed scan, and it's an almost violent kind of event on your network. On the EASM world, it's a little different. All we really want is your URL. And we really start from the standpoint of what can the bad guys get on, again, in the OSINT space. And so you give us your URL, and we give you back a series of reports. And we ran Risk Profiler a little over 7,000 times last year. Every time we found something that the potential customer had no idea either existed or that it was configured in the way that we found. And so, or that there was, we have a POC going on now with a customer that has 38,000 locations worldwide. And you won't believe how big their report was on things such as typo squatting, such as brand stealing, brand risk, and things such as that. So we take the URL. We don't want anything. We're not a credential scan. We don't go inside of your networks. We don't do anything like that. We're looking external. Where did the bad guys come from, and where did they go to? Outside of the bank, you gotta go find them. And so we've got again AI that can go out and scrub the deep, dark, and surface web. Got to come into grips with the cloud, because there's a little bit of a abstraction there. So once we get your URL, we're able to branch out from there and come up with an amazing amount of information. We've had customers who said, "No, we turned that server off years ago." And we've had customers say, "No, wait a minute," and they're come to find out their staging environment was exposed on the public side. It happens like that, and mainly the development side. A lot of the things we see are the developers, trying to get things done out in the cloud, and they spin up this and this and this, and there's not a lot of those controls that you would have inside of your four walls. So we're constantly finding those things and allowing them to either close the port, redefine the environment, shut the server off. Again, 7,000 times, we never had a single customer who didn't say, "Oh, that's not right," and only to find out that it was, because it's not a place you look that often. And it could be a pretty spooky that, out there, outside of your four walls is a pretty scary place. But unless you're out there, you're gonna have to wait for those bank robbers to come in, and then good luck if they get away.
So Gary, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you to, consult with you, know more about Risk Profiler, or just in general? What's the easiest way?
Sure. Yeah, it's riskprofiler.io, riskprofiler.io. My email address is gary.merry, that's MERRY, at riskprofiler.io. And, you put your URL in our site, and we'll run a report for you, and you're going to be surprised.
Well, so highly encouraged to do that and reach out to Gary. And I feel like we should just, do this more often. We'll maybe talk about some current events, and you'd be the perfect person to dissect, potential, breach that happened, especially at retailers. So maybe dissect as post-mortem. But until then, thanks for everyone for watching this and joining us. Looking forward to seeing you in the next one. And, stay safe online as well as offline.
Fantastic. Take care, David. Nice talking to you.
Likewise.